Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger, with the Offit Kurman Employment Group. So this week, we are talking about summer colds, which unfortunately, Russell's just finishing getting over one, and the cold and flu season that's coming and how that is all impacted by COVID. So a lot of folks are struggling with summer colds right now, which obviously the symptoms are very similar to COVID symptoms. So a lot of employers are trying to figure out, well, what do I do if I have employees that are symptomatic, vaccinated, unvaccinated? What are the rules? And this is something that's only going to, be more of an issue as we go into the fall and winter, which we are normally dealing with cold and flu symptoms and sick employees. So, what advice are we giving employers these days, Russell?
Yeah, well, first, hopefully you can avoid it. That's the best advice. I mean, it's right, but beyond my personal experience, there was a headline this morning from the New York Times that said, why everyone has the worst summer colds ever. And there's some, there's some public health science around this that colds are back. People are back out, not wearing masks. In social gatherings because they're fully vaccinated. It's safe to do so from a COVID standpoint, but but these other germs haven't gone away. So they're still out there. And from an employment standpoint, what we've been saying and what the guidance says is that, if you're symptomatic, whether you're vaccinated or not, you should be isolating. In fact, what the CDC says right now is a fully vaccinated person who experiences symptoms consistent with COVID-19 should isolate themselves from others, be clinically evaluated for COVID-19, and tested for COVID-19. So, that's pretty straightforward, easy guidance. Someone's symptomatic, whether it's a cold or COVID, you don't know until the person gets tested. So we should presume and operate as if it were COVID until the person gets tested. So I think for that half of it, our advice is pretty easy, right? If someone's symptomatic, stay home, isolate, don't come to work, and go see a doctor and get tested. The problem really comes with, or at least not the problem, but the question, the unanswered question, at least as far as the CDC is concerned at this point, is what happens when that symptomatic person goes and gets tested and gets a negative test result. Because really what the guidance says, what I just read was you should isolate and get tested. And it links to the when to isolate guidance that's been around for a year and a half now. And that guidance doesn't say you can discontinue isolation with a negative test. It says you should be waiting 10 days from the first onset of symptoms, and you should be waiting at least 24 hours until you've been without fever. And that seems like extremely conservative, extremely burdensome on employers when fully vaccinated people test negative. And the problem right now is, at least from the CDC, there's no clear guidance as to, what the guidance doesn't say is isolate and then test. And if you test negative, you're fine if you're fully vaccinated because, the odds of a false negative and a breakthrough case combined are so low, we don't have to worry about it. And maybe that's forthcoming, but that's just not what it says at this point.
Yeah, I think that we'll definitely see some updated guidance coming out. I mean, I think we kind of have to at this point, just given this issue. And I think it's definitely going to be something that in the interim, employers from a practical standpoint are going to be facing and potentially taking that risk, even though the guidance doesn't say that that's acceptable behavior at this point. Especially if you've got employees that can't work remotely and have to work in person. I think employers may think that that's a risk worth taking to say, if someone's vaccinated, they test negative and they still have symptoms, to make an assumption that it's a cold and proceed that way. But I would say definitely that if there is an opportunity for people to work remotely, that keep them home, have them work remotely, be on the safe side for now, and keep an eye out for new guidance. But definitely something that employers want to make sure that they're updating their policies as we go into cold and flu season for sure. Hopefully by then we'll have some more guidance. But in the interim, just making sure that employees are clear and still being vigilant, especially unvaccinated employees are being vigilant about their symptoms and not just assuming it's a cold. because that's something that now that it's not on people's minds as much is more likely to happen. Where for months we've been like, oh my gosh, my throat might hurt. I'm not quite sure. It's a little scratchy. Like I better not go anywhere. So I think that as we've become more vaccinated and things, people are it's not the first thought necessarily. So definitely important to remind employees of this, I think, moving forward.
Yeah, and it kind of leads into something that'll probably be a little more prevalent this fall, as it was last fall, is encouraging people to get the flu vaccine.
Yeah.
Because it reduces the risk of what we're talking about, of this symptom, similar symptoms and confusion and need to possibly isolate because of COVID concerns. If you're flu vaccinated, you're just less likely to get sick with that as well. And it's another thing that I think we saw last fall, employers and government encouraging. And I'd expect to see that. I mean, you see that every year because who wants to lose people to the flu for a week? But I think in the COVID times, it's probably even more important to emphasize that as well.
Yeah, and continuing hygiene practices, still removal of the communal and pretzel jar, our favorite reference there. But I think that that's something that we'll definitely see continuing in the workplaces, continued hygiene practices and hand washing and encouragement and
Yeah,
sanitation and things like that. So
yeah. I mean, these things that are good ideas to reduce germs um, are good ideas, whether the germ is COVID-19, the flu, cold, anything else that could be floating around a workplace. It's probably a good idea to, minimize that as much as you can, but that goes, 100 times over while you're in the midst of a pandemic.
well, thanks, Russell, and stay healthy until next time, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Sarah.